자, 이번 순서는 이번 행사의 의제를 제시하는 기조연설을 청해 듣는 순서입니다. 기조연설의 주제는 지속가능한 도시공간을 만들기 위한 글로벌 파트너로서의 책임인데요. 국토교통부 차관을 역임하신 김경환 서강대학교 경제학과 교수님께서 기조연설을 해주시겠습니다. 네, 교수님을 무대 위로 모시겠습니다. 네, 고맙습니다.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to congratulate LH on putting together this very important forum. And I also feel grateful to LH for inviting me over to address this distinguished audience today. My role as a keynote speaker is to set the tone for rich discussions that will follow. This is my outline. I will talk about Sustainable Development Goals and the New Urban Agenda as goals for sustainable development and managing urbanization. And I'll talk about achievements so far and the remaining gaps. And then I'll talk about ESG, which is the focus of our discussion this afternoon, which I think is an accelerator of SDGs and the New Urban Agenda. So I will put ESG in the context with the SDG and the NUA, and I'll go through the recent performance of ESG investing and how it has been successful and what remains to be done. And then finally, going forward, we'll assess opportunities ahead and what needs to be done by international partners. Okay, the context. We are faced with a big challenge of sustainable development and managing urbanization, especially in the developing world. At the same time, we're going through a very turbulent time, the pandemic and the Russian aggression to Ukraine, and global economic uncertainties. However, these factors are likely to reinforce rather than weakening our drive for sustainable development and social inclusion. Also, there are some positive developments. New technologies are becoming available and their costs are coming down, so hence becoming more affordable. And the level of awareness of the reality of climate change is going up. So with this background, we're going to assess where we stand and evaluate the opportunities and remaining gaps and find better ways to address the problems. We all know what SDGs are and what the New Urban Agenda is. SDG goals, which consists of 17 goals altogether with 169 targets, were adopted in 2015. And we are most interested in SDG 11, which says inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable cities and human settlements, because this is uniquely spatial among all the SDGs, and also it's the historically first ever standalone goal at the global level of sustainable cities. The New Urban Agenda, which was adopted in Habitat 3 conference in 2016 and later endorsed by the UN General Assembly the same year, is considered to be an accelerator of SDG 11. So it concretized the contents of Sustainable Development Goal 11 and then make plans for implementing the principles. And these are the 17 SDGs, including number 11 we're focusing on. This looks a little complex, and it is indeed complex because all these SDGs are interrelated with many others among them. And the NUA, the New Urban Agenda, is structured around four dimensions of sustainability, namely social, economic, environmental, and spatial sustainability. And there are several means of implementation. National urban policies and other intervention mechanisms. Also, hard measures for infrastructure and public services, such as water and sanitation, energy and transport. And then also, we have soft measures, the culture and education and so on. And also, geospatial information will play a key role in addressing the urban issues. There is a clear connection between SDG 11 and other SDGs on the one hand, and also with the New Urban Agenda. And as you can see, there are specific paragraphs in the New Urban Agenda which are connected to Sustainable Development Goal 11. Now, after we go through these SDGs and the New Urban Agenda, we ask the question of where we stand. Unfortunately, we all agree that efforts to deal with climate change and also to achieve Sustainable Development Goals have been inadequate so far. And the financing gap is a big issue. It's very large and getting even larger following the pandemic. So this slide shows the financing gap to achieve SDGs and also to address the climate change challenge. And SDG financing gap was estimated to be about 2.5 trillion US dollars before the COVID broke out, and then it has increased to $4.2 trillion a year. So it's a very large number. And urban climate finance gap is also very huge. The actual needs are estimated to be about 4.5 to 5.4 trillion US dollars, but actual funds mobilized was only $384 billion in 2017 and 2018, which is less than 10% of what was required. ODA has been increasing in some countries, but it is way short of addressing the financing needs. Okay, well, this is Korea's performance on SDG. It's ranked 27th out of 163 countries assessed. We are doing reasonably well in most goals, and especially we are doing quite well in SDG 11, fortunately. Okay, so far we talked about SDGs and the New Urban Agenda. But the highlight of our discussion today is ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance criteria as an accelerator of SDGs and the New Urban Agenda. So there you will see many similar diagrams illustrating the concept of ESG, which was first introduced in 2004 in the document entitled "Who Cares Wins? Connecting Financial Markets to a Changing World." And it refers to methods and processes of fulfilling SDGs, and it's a universal approach. And it takes a long-term view, and it is primarily driven by institutional investors who want to steer the behavior of corporations toward the social and environmental and governance criteria. By design, these ESG criteria can be broadly mapped to SDGs and also the the new urban agenda, as you can see. For example, SDG 11 can be half environment and half about governance. There has been a steady increase in sustainable investment or ESG investment at the global level in recent years. And the latest estimate is that this year it will surpass 41 trillion US dollars and it will reach 50 trillion US dollars by the year 2025, which is a promising trend. And what it means is that firms can do well by doing good for the entire globe. So it means that business interests can be aligned with the sustainable development goals and also climate change objectives. And we find positive correlation between ESG and financial performance of firms in a large number of studies covering the US and Europe. And also, limited Korean studies also suggest that Korean firms also show some positive correlation. And this shows that from a 2021 meta-study, which looked at over 1,000 peer-reviewed papers and reports published between 2015 and 2020 by a team of researchers at New York University, and it found a very clear tie between ESG and corporate success. To be specific, the studies that indicate that there is positive correlation between the two was 58%, while those which found negative correlation is only 8%. So it's an overwhelming approval of the effectiveness of ESG in inducing firms to succeed. But the most important part of achieving this SDGs or climate change is finance, because as Bertrand Renault, a former World Bank housing finance expert, enunciated, cities are built the way they are financed. So financing is crucial, and we are seeing some innovative mechanisms, including the energy efficient mortgages initiative by the European Mortgage Federation, which seeks to mobilize private bank finance to improve the energy efficiency of buildings in Europe. And there are some equity funds investing in smart cities related firms. And we talk about green bonds and their contribution to achieving SDGs. And this chart shows a clear trend of increasing issuance of green bonds, sustainable bonds, social bonds, and sustainability-linked bonds in recent years. And we are seeing some increase in the issuance of GSSS bonds in Korea as well, as you can see. And then multilateral development banks have been effective champions of ESG as well. The World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, both have their own way of addressing the ESG criteria in their operation. And some bilateral donors, such as USAID, Green Invest Asia, which targets at catalyzing private finance to drive investment in these key sectors toward more sustainable business model. And Business Sweden has projects specifically tied to individual sustainable development goals. And JICA of Japan also has an EGS guidance procedure in their operation. And Korea has recently established KESG standards, which is in line with the global standards on this important area. And key state enterprises in Korea, including LH, have their own ESG strategies in recent years. As you can see, in all three areas of environment, social, and governance. Each and every major state enterprise has clear stated goals and their priority areas. Okay, what lies ahead going forward? We note that business opportunities are expanding in SDG-related activities. For example, IFC estimated that climate investment opportunity in developing countries' markets in only 6 sectors will be nearly 30 trillion US dollars. And there are many estimates by the private consulting companies about smart cities market and also components of the smart cities markets. But for example, smart cities global market size was just over 1 trillion US dollars in 2021. It is expected to reach nearly $7 trillion by 2030. This means that Korea and other countries will have increased opportunities in the global market for infrastructure investment, for example. And Korea has been consistently ranked 4th or 5th among the countries engaging in global construction infrastructure markets. And Korea's market share has been 5 or 6% in the recent past. Smart city is a particularly important business area for Korea and Korean companies because Korea was the first country in the world to embrace the concept of then ubiquitous city, which is a first generation smart cities in new town developments. And we legislated an enabling law in 2008, which was later transformed to expand the scope to include making existing cities smarter in 2017. So now we need to retrofit existing cities by converting the current infrastructure, making it smarter and meet the new standards. And here ESG can play an important role. And then in particular, LH has been a very active player in this market domestically, but also it has some international portfolio. You can see that the numbers in the parentheses represents the smart cities related project that LH is implementing abroad. Another area is green buildings or smart buildings. Korea's building stock is aging very quickly. But as of 2020 year end, nearly 40% of all buildings in Korea are 30 years of age and older. And this figure is 50% in Seoul. So there is an enormous demand to upgrade and renovate, retrofit, or redevelop this existing old building to meet the challenges of smart, sustainable development. So this involves adopting new technologies, but also environment-friendly building materials and installing energy use control system and so on. So the LH is engaged in a zero energy housing, which is also the government policy emphasis area. We are just getting out of this pandemic, and I think we are of the view that the trend of urbanization itself will not be fundamentally affected as a result of the pandemic, but there are some inevitable changes in spatial organization of economic activities within cities. The most important change is the increase in remote working, and this will change mobility and the pattern for shopping and so on. So it's really important to come up with the best way to recover and build back the cities to make it more sustainable and inclusive. This will require upgrading infrastructure and public services. And we also need to address the needs of those hit hard by the pandemic. And in doing so, we need to explore innovative financing methods and also the best technologies available. And Ukraine war and ensuing energy crisis has posed a new challenge of energy security. But at the end of the day, the assessment is that the war will strengthen the drive for ESG, especially the environmental part. It will be the energy crisis should be the driver of an energy transition, not an impediment to it. So, having gone through the SDGs and the New Urban Agenda as our goals and assess our achievements and the remaining gaps, and also looked at the contribution of ESG principles in achieving these important global goals, what can we expect from international partners? Well, I think that these same entities should play an equally important role in domestic markets and in the global marketplaces. So we need to ensure that the operation of these partners be more closely aligned with the global goals, both at home and abroad. And they need to upgrade their efforts to implement the ESG principles in their operation, in domestic operation, but they also need to observe the local ESG rules in the relevant countries they operate abroad. And they also need to seek opportunities to collaborate with the multilateral development banks and sometimes bilateral donors in the area of sustainable urban development. But Korea is in a unique position. A lot of people in the developing countries say that they are inspired by what Korea has achieved over the past 50, 60 years. But I also say we are very humble by what we have been able to achieve. But also we recognize the limitations and mistakes that we have made along the line. So we are very much willing to share both our successes and mistakes with other countries. And this identity will play an important role in international cooperation going forward. And finally, resources are very important, but they are scarce. So we need to make every effort to tap various available financial resource bases and also utilize the best available and affordable technology going forward. Thank you very much for listening.